This wasn't supposed to get uncomfortable, but it did. Jason Aldean walked onto a daytime talk show, expecting a normal interview. Instead, he was challenged in a way no one expected. The studio went quiet. No shouting, no drama. Just one calm response that flipped the entire conversation and left the hosts speechless. Stay with me, because this moment changed everything. Asterisk, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's dive into what really happened. Asterisk, absolutely no one saw this coming. What was supposed to be a normal daytime talk show appearance quickly turned into a moment that viewers would replay, rewind, and debate for days. The kind of moment that doesn't need shouting to feel explosive. The kind that makes a studio go quiet in a way you can almost feel through the screen. Audiences tuned in expecting the usual formula. Friendly introductions, light jokes, a little tension maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary. After all, this was daytime television. Polite conversation, safe questions, controlled disagreement, but within minutes, everything changed. Jason Aldean stepped onto the set with the calm confidence fans know him for. A country music superstar with decades of success, countless awards, and millions of loyal listeners. He wasn't there to argue. He wasn't there to provoke. He was there to talk about music, his journey, and the connection he shares with everyday people who see themselves in his songs. At least, that's how it started. The atmosphere felt relaxed at first. Smiles, casual conversation. The kind of setup that lowers your guard. But then Joy Behar leaned in and the tone shifted. Her question wasn't curious. It wasn't neutral. It carried an edge that instantly changed the temperature in the room. You could see it on everyone's faces. The air got heavier. The smiles faded. The energy shifted. Joy Behar, known for her sharp commentary and unapologetic opinions, challenged Aldean in a way that suggested his music and the people who connect with it represented something controversial, something worth confronting. It wasn't just a question about art anymore. It felt like a judgment, and in that moment, viewers expected one of two things. Either Jason Aldean would fire back emotionally, or he would back down and deflect. But he did neither. Instead, something unexpected happened. Jason Aldean paused, not an awkward pause but a deliberate one. A moment where he chose control over reaction, and that pause alone spoke louder than words. It signaled confidence. It signaled restraint. It signaled that he wasn't about to play the role written for him. There was no shouting, no raised voice, no dramatic interruption, just calm, and that calm became the most powerful weapon in the room. As the seconds passed, the studio seemed frozen. The audience leaned in. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, because everyone could sense if this conversation had crossed into dangerous territory, and Jason Aldean was about to respond in a way no one expected. What followed wasn't chaos. It was precision, a response so measured, so grounded, that it flipped the entire exchange on its head. A response that didn't attack but exposed the weakness of the challenge itself, and in doing so, it left Joy Behar with nowhere to redirect the conversation. This wasn't just the beginning of a tense interview. It was the opening moment of a cultural collision, one that would quickly spread far beyond the studio walls. And from that moment on, nothing about this appearance would be remembered as routine ever again. At the beginning, everything felt safe, familiar, almost predictable. Jason Aldean spoke calmly about his career, how he started from the ground up, the long nights on the road, and the years it took before real success arrived. He talked about his fans, not as numbers or demographics, but as people who work hard, raise families, and find pieces of their own lives reflected in his music. The audience responded immediately. Heads nodded. Expressions softened. It was clear that many in the room recognized what he was describing. Authenticity wasn't just a buzzword to Aldean, it was the foundation of his work. He explained that music, at its best, tells honest stories. Stories that don't always fit neatly into headlines or trends, but still matter deeply to those who hear them. For a moment, It felt like the conversation was exactly where it was supposed to be. Then Joy Behar stepped in. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Her question didn't sound like curiosity. It sounded like a challenge wrapped in a sentence. She questioned the message behind Aldean's music and hinted that its popularity wasn't accidental but ideological, that it appealed to a specific political mindset rather than a universal human experience. The implication hung in the air: was his music successful because of talent, or because it stirred controversy? The studio went quiet almost instantly. Not the normal television pause. This was different. This was the kind of silence that signals everyone understands the moment has just changed. Even the other hosts seemed to sense it. Eyes darted, postures shifted. The comfortable rhythm of the show disappeared. This was no longer a conversation about music, it was a test. And all eyes turned to Jason Aldean. For a split second, viewers may have expected frustration, or defensiveness, maybe even a sharp comeback. After all, being publicly reduced to a political labelist, especially on live television, is enough to provoke anyone but Jason. Aldean didn't take the bait, he didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush to defend himself. Instead, he paused. It wasn't hesitation. It was control. That pause stretched just long enough to command attention. Long enough for the audience to lean forward. Long enough for the tension to thicken. In that silence, the power dynamic in the room quietly shifted. Because silence, when used correctly, is powerful. It signals confidence. It signals thoughtfulness. It signals that what comes next matters. And in that moment, Jason Aldean owned the room without saying a single word. You could almost feel the expectation building. When someone remains calm under pressure, especially when they're being challenged, it sends a clear message. I'm not shaken. I'm ready. That pause wasn't empty. It was deliberate, and everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, knew something meaningful was coming next, because when a person refuses to react emotionally in a charged moment, it usually means they're about to respond with clarity. And clarity, in moments like these, can be devastating. Jason Aldean finally spoke, and the moment he did, everything changed. His voice was steady. Not defensive, not emotional, just controlled and deliberate. The kind of tone that immediately tells you this response has been thought through long before this moment ever arrived. He began by addressing the core assumption behind the question, not aggressively, but clearly. He explained that his music was never written to win political points or gain approval from media circles. It wasn't created to satisfy critics, headlines, or television debates. It was written for people. People who wake up early, work long hours, and carry responsibilities most never see. People who raise families, face struggles quietly, and still hold on to their values even when the world tells them they shouldn't. He emphasized that those stories rarely get airtime, but they exist, and they matter. And as he spoke, something shifted. Jason Aldean wasn't arguing. He was explaining without ever attacking Joy Behar personally. He challenged a much bigger idea, the expectation that artists must fit into one acceptable narrative to be respected. That creativity must be filtered, approved, and sanitized before it's allowed to exist in public spaces. He made it clear that music, real music, doesn't come from trend cycles or studio panels. It comes from lived experience, from moments that aren't always comfortable, but are always honest. What made his response so effective wasn't volume, it was clarity. He reminded the room that millions of people connect with his songs not because they were told to, not because it was fashionable, and not because controversy pushed them there, but because the music felt familiar, because it reflected their lives in a way few platforms ever do. That point landed hard. You could feel it. The audience's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Faces softened, a few nods turned into many. The tension that once filled the room began to dissolve, not into agreement, but into understanding. This wasn't a political debate anymore. It was about respect. Respect for different experiences. Respect for different voices. Respect for the idea that not every story needs approval to be valid. Jason Aldean didn't claim to speak for everyone. He didn't say his perspective was the only one that mattered. What he said clearly and calmly was that his perspective mattered to Dot, and that distinction changed everything. Joy Behar attempted to push back, trying to redirect the conversation toward broader implications, but the energy was gone. The momentum had shifted entirely. What once felt like a challenge now felt like a response, searching for footing, because Aldean had already reframed the conversation. He had moved it away from labels and assumptions and placed it squarely on human experience, and once a discussion reaches that level, surface-level arguments lose their power. The strength of his response wasn't in shutting someone down, it was in standing firm without hostility. In a media landscape fueled by outrage and reaction, Jason Aldean demonstrated something increasingly and that composure didn't just protect his position, it elevated it by the time he finished speaking. It was clear to everyone watching, this wasn't about winning an argument, it was about owning your truth and refusing to let it be dismissed, and in doing so, Jason Aldean didn't just answer a question, he took control of the entire room. The most revealing part of the exchange wasn't anything Jason Aldean or Joy Behar said, it was what happened after. As Aldean finished speaking, the studio fell into an uneasy silence, not the kind planned by producers, not the kind filled with applause, cues, or quick transitions. This was raw, unscripted stillness, the kind that only happens when everyone realizes a line has just been crossed, and the conversation can't go back to where it started. Some of the hosts looked down at their notes. Others shifted in their seats or avoided eye contact altogether. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The atmosphere had changed, and everyone on set knew it. The audience, which had been visibly tense just moments earlier, reacted differently. You could see it on their face, is approval, recognition, even relief. Not because they agreed with every word Jason Aldean said, but because they recognized the way he said it. He didn't shout. He didn't mock. He didn't dismiss anyone in the room. Jason Aldean didn't win the moment through volume or confrontation. He won by staying grounded, and that's exactly why this moment struck such a powerful chord far beyond the studio walls. Within hours, clips of the exchange began circulating online. Short videos, reaction clips, commentary threads. Viewers from all sides of the conversation were sharing the moment not because it was explosive in the traditional sense, but because it felt rare. Comment after comment echoed the same theme. Finally, someone stayed calm, respectful, but firm. This is how disagreements should happen. Many viewers said it was refreshing to see someone defend their perspective without resorting to insults or hostility. In a digital world driven by outrage and instant reactions, Aldean's restraint stood out as something different, almost unexpected. That calm didn't weaken his message, it strengthened it, because certainty doesn't need to be loud to be effective. In today's media environment, confrontation is often rewarded. Sharp interruptions, viral emotional escalation. But this moment went in the opposite direction. And that's exactly why it resonated. Jason Aldean refused to play the role assigned to him. He didn't become defensive. He didn't escalate. He didn't retreat. He simply held his ground. For Joy Behar, the exchange revealed something important. A confrontational approach can work, but only when the other person engages on the same terms. When they don't, the strategy collapses. Without emotional reaction to push against, the confrontation loses its force. And that dynamic was visible to everyone watching. This wasn't a shouting match. It wasn't a viral meltdown. It was a quiet turning point. The kind that lingers longer than outrage ever does. The studio reaction told the real story. Not applause lines or talking points, but body language, silence, and the subtle acknowledgement that something meaningful had just happened. And that's why this moment didn't fade after the segment ended. It followed viewers home. It sparked conversation. It invited reflection, because in a world full of noise, the moments that hit hardest are often the ones delivered calmly. This wasn't just a clash between Jason Aldean and Joy Behar. It was a snapshot of a much larger cultural moment, one playing out far beyond a single television studio. A moment that revealed how divided expectations have become when it comes to expression, identity, and who gets to speak without explanation. On one side are media spaces that often operate within clearly defined boundaries, spaces where guests are expected to fit into familiar narratives, where certain viewpoints are welcomed and others are immediately questioned, not always openly but subtly, through tone, framing, and implication. On the other side are artists like Jason Aldean, who believe their role isn't to conform but to reflect real life as they see it. Life that isn't always tidy, experiences that don't always align with popular commentary, stories that make some people uncomfortable simply because they exist outside approved conversations. That tension is what made this moment resonate so deeply. Jason Aldean's response struck a nerve because it mirrored what many viewers feel but rarely hear said out loud: that not every voice needs permission to exist. That art doesn't require validation from panels or headlines to be meaningful, and that lived experience, even when inconvenient, is still valid. What made the moment powerful was an agreement. Plenty of viewers may disagree with Aldean's perspective, and that's the point. The exchange wasn't about convincing everyone, it was about demonstrating how disagreement can exist without dismissal. Under pressure, Jason Aldean didn't become defensive. He didn't retreat. He didn't escalate. He stayed composed, confident, and authentic, and in doing so, he showed how strength can look quiet and controlled rather than loud and reactive. That's why this exchange continues to circulate. Not because it featured raised voices or shocking insults. Not because it produced a viral meltdown, but because it delivered something rarer: clarity without cruelty. In a time when attention is often earned through outrage, this moment stood apart by doing the opposite. It reminded viewers that conviction doesn't need chaos to be effective, that confidence doesn't require domination, and that sometimes the most powerful response is simply refusing to be shaken. Jason Aldean didn't demand agreement. He demanded respect, and that distinction matters. In the end, this wasn't about winning an argument on live television. It was about reminding audiences that calm conviction can still command attention, that authenticity still resonates, and that standing your ground doesn't have to mean standing against someone else. Jason Aldean didn't just shut down a question, he reminded everyone watching on all sides of the conversation that dignity, composure, and honesty can speak louder than any argument ever could. And that's why this moment didn't fade, it stayed.